"Why do you shun my daughter?" the alien queen asked. I spoke the truth. Captain Elias Vorn had never seen a planet like Calathar. As the shuttle descended through the thick lavender clouds, the sprawling capital came into view, a mixture of crystal towers, gleaming bridges, and gardens suspended in midair. The sheer scale of the city was breathtaking, unlike anything he had ever encountered in the galaxy. Calathar was a world ruled by the alien queen Lyrana, known for her intelligence, strategic mind, and devotion to her only daughter, Princess Aelith. Yet as Elias gazed out the window, he felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. Diplomacy was never simple, and this mission felt heavier than any he had undertaken before. He had been sent here not merely as a diplomat, but as a representative of humanity's growing influence among interstellar civilizations. Trade negotiations, scientific collaborations, and political alliances were all on the agenda, yet he quickly realized that Calathar's court was different from any other he had seen. The palace staff moved with a precision that was almost ceremonial, their every gesture measured, their eyes constantly scanning for missteps. Even the air seemed charged, as if the planet itself was alert to his presence. Upon arrival, Elias was escorted through a grand hallway lined with towering statues of past queens. The statues depicted figures with elongated limbs, translucent skin shimmering in subtle patterns, and eyes that seemed to follow him wherever he moved. The palace attendants spoke little, yet their eyes hinted at curiosity and judgment. Every step Elias took seemed amplified by the marble floor beneath him, echoing in the cavernous hall. At the entrance to the throne room he paused, taking a deep breath. Today he would meet Queen Lyrana for the first time. He had prepared for countless diplomatic questions, cultural misunderstandings, and potential traps, yet nothing could prepare him for the weight of expectation in her gaze. As he entered, the room's lighting shifted subtly, highlighting the queen seated on a throne that seemed grown from crystal and organic metal. Her presence was formidable, her posture rigid, yet her eyes held a quiet intensity that made him instinctively straighten his back. "Captain Elias Vorn," she said, her voice resonating with authority and calm. "Welcome to Calathar. I hope your journey was satisfactory." Elias bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, it was a journey filled with wonder. I am honored to be here." The queen's gaze shifted slightly toward the far side of the throne room, and Elias followed it. There, standing apart from the gathering of dignitaries, was Princess Aelith. She was young, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made her seem older than her years. Her large eyes, deep and reflective, avoided his, as if she feared their meeting could change the delicate balance of her world. She wore a robe that shimmered in shades of teal and silver, and her hair, the color of moonlight, flowed freely behind her. Elias could sense her isolation immediately. She was not shy in the human sense, she was withdrawn by circumstance. Courtiers whispered and glanced at her, yet no one approached. Even in this room filled with chatter, she seemed alone. Something about her sadness struck him, a sense of empathy he could not ignore. Queen Lyrana's eyes returned to Elias. "Why do you shun my daughter?" she asked, her voice calm yet carrying an edge of accusation. Elias froze. The question had caught him completely off guard. He had not spoken a word to the princess since his arrival, and his observations had been limited to polite nods and formal gestures. Shun her. He had only respected the palace's protocols and tried not to overstep. Yet the queen's words hung in the air like a challenge he could not dismiss. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, choosing his words with precision, "I have not shunned her. I have observed her from afar, trying to understand her and her world. My intention is to show respect, not disregard." The queen's expression remained unreadable. Elias felt the tension in the room increase, the courtiers shifting slightly as if sensing the undercurrent of danger and intrigue. Queen Lyrana's daughter remained at a distance, her hands clasped together and her gaze still fixed downward. Observation is one thing, Captain, the Queen continued. Interaction is another. My daughter has seen humans before, yet you have ignored her entirely. This is not acceptable. You are not here merely to observe, you are here to engage. Tell me why you have treated her this way. Elias swallowed hard, choosing honesty over diplomacy. Your Majesty, I have not treated her in any particular way. I have tried to understand her culture, her world, and the ways in which I might communicate respectfully. I did not wish to make a mistake by approaching too boldly or without understanding. If that is considered avoidance, I apologize. For a moment the Queen said nothing, her piercing gaze weighing on him. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice softer, yet still carrying authority. Captain, you are clever and cautious, but caution is not the same as understanding. My daughter does not need a cautious observer, she needs someone who sees her for who she is. Can you do that? Elias met her gaze steadily. I will do my best, Your Majesty. I do not claim to understand everything about her world immediately, but I promise to act with honesty and respect. A faint smile touched the Queen's lips, though her eyes remained sharp. We shall see, she said. For now, watch carefully. Watch and learn. Then perhaps you may understand why my daughter appears distant. And then, perhaps, you may prove whether humans are capable of seeing truth beyond appearances. Elias nodded, feeling both relief and apprehension. He had navigated complex negotiations before, but this was different. He was not merely dealing with political agendas or trade agreements. Here, his actions would be measured against the eyes of a young princess and the scrutiny of her mother. One wrong move could endanger not just his mission, but the fragile trust he hoped to build. As the initial meeting concluded, courtiers began to disperse, leaving Elias to explore the palace under supervision. He walked through corridors lined with intricate murals depicting the history of Calithar, battles fought, alliances forged, and moments of peace celebrated. The murals captured both triumph and loss, showing that even a powerful civilization carried the weight of its history. He paused before a mural showing a young princess learning under the guidance of her mother. The Queen's hand rested gently on the princess's shoulder, and yet there was a strictness in her posture, a lesson in authority and expectation. Elias thought of Princess Aelith, standing apart from the court, carrying a similar mixture of pressure and isolation. He began to understand why the Queen's question had been so sharp. To her, any perceived neglect was not just a social slight, it was a potential threat to the princess's growth and safety. Elias knew he had to approach this with care. He could not simply force conversation or overstep boundaries. He needed to learn the subtleties of Calitharian culture, the meaning behind every gesture, every pause, every glance. Only then could he truly connect with the princess in a way that respected her world and earned the Queen's trust. Later, as he rested in his assigned quarters, Elias reviewed his observations. Princess Aelith was intelligent, curious, and cautious. She had a quiet strength, a resilience shaped by years of careful isolation and expectation. He noted her habits, her interactions with the environment, and the patterns of movement among her attendants. Slowly, he began to form a plan, not to manipulate her, but to understand her world enough to act with integrity and honesty. That evening, the palace gardens offered a rare moment of calm. Bioluminescent plants glowed softly, casting a serene light across winding paths and flowing water features. Elias walked slowly, reflecting on the Queen's words. He realized that the challenge was not just winning trust, it was proving that a human could see and respect truth in a world that often measured value by appearances and adherence to strict rules. As he walked, he noticed movement near a fountain. Princess Aelith stood there alone, her hands gently tracing patterns in the water. Her expression was thoughtful, almost melancholy. Elias considered approaching, but he remembered the Queen's guidance. Cautious observation alone would not suffice. He needed to understand her fully, to learn the ways in which he could demonstrate sincerity without overstepping. He remained at a distance, watching quietly as the princess moved with a grace that seemed natural, yet tinged with the weight of unspoken expectations. In her solitude, she seemed both powerful and fragile, a combination that demanded respect and patience. Elias felt a growing determination. If he could earn her trust, it would not only prove humanity's capacity for understanding, but also open a path for dialogue, cooperation, and perhaps even friendship in a world that was otherwise closed to outsiders. As night fell over the palace, Elias knew the real work had only just begun. The queen's question lingered in his mind. "Why do you shun my daughter?" It was more than a question. It was a challenge, a test, and a call for integrity. He understood now that his mission on Calathar was not simply about negotiation. It was about proving that truth, patience, and empathy could bridge even the deepest divides between worlds. And so, under the glow of the bioluminescent gardens, Elias Vorn prepared for the days ahead, determined to meet the Queen's challenge, not with empty words or flattery, but with honesty, respect, and the uniquely human capacity to see beyond appearances into the heart of another. Being the next morning, Captain Elias Vorn awoke before the palace stirred. Through the wide windows of his quarters, he could see Calathar's twin suns rising over the distant mountains, casting a soft golden light across the city. From this vantage point, the palace looked even more magnificent, its spires and bridges glimmering in the dawn. Yet beneath the beauty, Elias sensed the currents of tension that shaped life within its walls. Today would be another test, he knew, and he had to proceed with patience. After a simple breakfast of synthesized fruit and protein cubes, Elias was escorted to the palace library. The library was vast, stretching over multiple floors, filled with towering shelves of books, scrolls, and holographic data archives. The scent of aged paper mingled with the subtle hum of energy conduits, creating a sense of history and knowledge almost tangible in the air. Here, scholars and advisors moved quietly, consulting texts and discussing matters in hushed tones. Elias had come to the library with a purpose. He needed to understand Calatharian customs, their social expectations, and most importantly, the pressures placed on Princess Aelith. If he was to earn her trust, and the Queen's, he could not rely on human assumptions alone. He needed to study carefully and observe the patterns that governed the princess's life. A scholar named Ilara approached him. She was tall, with translucent skin patterned with faint golden lines, and her eyes reflected curiosity and intelligence. "Captain Vorn," she said, her voice soft but precise, "you seek to understand the princess. That is uncommon for your kind. Most humans are content to perform the formalities and move on. Do you truly wish to learn?" Elias nodded. "Yes, I do not wish to offend or misinterpret. I need to understand her world as it is, not as I imagine it to be." Ilara smiled faintly. "Then you must learn about the pressures she faces. Princess Aelith is not merely a child. She is heir to an empire. Every word, every glance, every decision she makes is observed. Even small mistakes can ripple into consequences for the entire court. She is clever, but she has been isolated to protect her from such errors. It is not loneliness that drives her apart, it is expectation." Elias listened carefully, absorbing every detail. The more he learned, the more he realized that his earlier hesitation might have been interpreted wrongly. In human society, observing from a distance was often a sign of caution or respect. In Calatharian society, it could be read as neglect or even disdain. After spending hours in the library, Elias was escorted to a private courtyard to rest. The courtyard was a maze of flowering plants, crystal fountains, and bioluminescent vines that glowed softly under the afternoon sun. He noticed movement at the far end, a figure stepping lightly across the paths. It was Princess Aelith. She was alone, carrying a small notebook, and her attention was entirely absorbed in its contents. Elias hesitated. Approaching too quickly could startle her. Ignoring her could deepen the queen's suspicion. He decided to observe quietly from behind a tree, noting how she moved, how her fingers traced lines on the page, and how her lips occasionally formed words silently, as if reading or speaking to herself. As he watched, he noticed subtle signs of her intelligence and curiosity. The notebook contained star maps, carefully drawn constellations, and notes in a language that combined symbols and words. She paused frequently, tapping her chin thoughtfully, then adjusting lines with meticulous precision. Elias felt a deep respect for her dedication. She was not merely a sheltered princess. She was a mind hungry for knowledge, constrained by rules that forbade her from exploring too freely. Elias' presence did not go unnoticed for long. The princess glanced up, her eyes meeting his briefly. There was no fear, only curiosity. Then, as if deciding he was harmless, she returned to her notes. Elias breathed quietly, relieved that his choice to observe without interference had not provoked alarm. Later, a minor commotion drew him to the central hall. An error in the palace's energy grid had caused lights to flicker and automated doors to malfunction. Staff rushed to correct it, but Princess Aelith appeared calm, stepping forward to assess the situation. She analyzed the patterns of the system, offering solutions in precise, confident terms. Elias observed, impressed by her technical understanding and problem-solving skills. She was capable, intelligent, and far more self-reliant than most assumed. When the issue was resolved, Elias found himself walking beside her as she left the hall. "Your calculations were precise," he said softly. "I wouldn't have thought to approach the problem that way." The princess looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. You speak to me?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost tentative. "Most simply pass by." Elias smiled gently. "I noticed how carefully you handled it. I try to recognize skill when I see it, regardless of rank or species." Aelith studied him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Then perhaps you are different from the others," she said. That small acknowledgement felt like a victory to Elias. It was not trust yet, but it was the first opening, a crack in the wall that surrounded her. Over the next several days, Elias continued his careful approach. He observed the princess at mealtimes, in meetings, and while walking through the gardens. Each moment provided insight into her personality. She was cautious, reflective, and curious, often testing ideas silently before speaking. She had a dry sense of humor, subtle and fleeting, and a keen sense of observation that made him cautious not to underestimate her. Yet Elias also witnessed the pressures she faced. Courtiers corrected her tone, questioned her words, and occasionally scolded her for what seemed trivial. Even minor gestures were scrutinized. Elias realized that the princess's apparent withdrawal was not due to dislike or shyness, but a survival strategy in a world that demanded perfection from every royal move. One evening, Elias encountered her alone in the palace observatory, gazing at the stars. The room was filled with telescopes, holographic star charts, and maps of distant galaxies. She looked small against the backdrop of such vast knowledge, yet there was a determination in her eyes that matched the brilliance of the stars above. "You study the stars," Elias said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned but did not hide her notebook. "I want to understand them. Humans look up and see wonder. Calitharians, we often look up and see duty. The stars remind me there is more than protocol and expectation." Elias nodded. "I understand. Sometimes seeing the bigger picture is more important than following rules blindly." Aelith's eyes studied him. "And you? Do humans always speak truth, even when it is inconvenient?" He smiled softly. "We try, not perfectly, but we value honesty, even when it is difficult, even when it might cause problems. Truth is a kind of respect in its own way." For a long moment they shared silence, each contemplating the other's perspective. Then unexpectedly she smiled. "Perhaps you are not like the others, Captain. Perhaps you do see." Elias felt a surge of hope. It was a small step, but an important one. She had recognized him, not merely as a visitor or outsider, but as someone willing to understand and respect her. The palace staff soon noticed the quiet interactions between human and princess. Rumors began to circulate, and courtiers whispered of Elia's unusual behavior. Some questioned whether he was overstepping, others saw promise in his approach. Queen Lyrana, observing from her chambers, remained silent but attentive. She watched her daughter's reactions carefully, noting the subtle changes in her posture, her expressions, and her willingness to engage. One afternoon, the queen summoned Elias again. "Captain Vorn," she said, her tone measured, "you have begun to earn the princess's attention." That is unexpected. Most humans would have offended her already or ignored her entirely. "Tell me, why do you act differently?" Elias chose his words carefully. "Your Majesty, I do not act differently to impress or manipulate. I act this way because I wish to understand. I wish to see your daughter as she truly is, not as protocol or expectation demands others to see her. If that is unusual, I accept it, but it is the truth." The queen studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Truth, yes, that is what I value. We shall see if your truth endures and if your understanding grows. For now, continue observing, continue learning. The day will come when you must act, not merely watch. Be prepared." As Elias left the queen's presence, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenge was clear: to earn trust through honesty, patience, and respect. He realized that the princess's world was complex, shaped by expectations, traditions, and the weight of responsibility. Understanding her required more than observation. It required empathy, courage, and a willingness to see beyond appearances. That evening, he returned to the gardens, where Princess Aelith was once again alone, tracing patterns in the glowing flowers with gentle, precise movements. He approached slowly, keeping his distance but offering a presence that was calm and non-threatening. "You have been busy today," he said softly. She glanced at him, not startled this time but acknowledging him. "Yes, and you?" "I have been learning," he said honestly. "About your world, your people, and you. There is much to understand, and I hope I am doing so correctly." Aelith studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You are learning. That is more than most achieve. Perhaps you will succeed where others fail." Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not triumph, but it was progress. A small opening had been created, and with patience and honesty, it could grow. For the first time, he felt that the princess might not merely tolerate him, but might see him as someone trustworthy, someone capable of understanding and respecting her true self. And in the quiet of Calathar's glowing gardens, under the watchful eyes of a distant empire, Captain Elias Vorn began the first steps of a journey that would challenge him, test his character, and ultimately reveal the unique strength of humanity, a strength not measured in weapons or power, but in truth, empathy, and courage. The palace was quiet in the late afternoon. Most courtiers had retreated to private chambers or council meetings, leaving the halls and gardens nearly empty. Captain Elias Vorn moved carefully, aware that his every step could be observed, yet determined to spend time near Princess Aelith. He had learned much about Calatharian culture, the importance of subtle gestures, the weight of expectation on the princess, and the careful balance of observation and interaction required to earn trust. Today, he hoped to take a small step forward, not by speaking grand words, but by being present, steady, and attentive. Princess Aelith appeared in the central garden, her movements fluid and deliberate as she inspected rows of luminescent flowers. She paused frequently, jotting notes in a small tablet, occasionally leaning close to examine a bloom, then stepping back as if evaluating its place in the broader design of the garden. Elias watched from a shaded path, careful not to intrude, but close enough to observe the thoughtful precision with which she worked. For days, he had noticed the princess's solitude, her retreat from social interactions, and the careful boundaries she maintained with everyone around her. Yet there was also an unmistakable curiosity in her eyes, a desire to understand the world beyond her restricted court. Elias had observed this silently, knowing that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. As he walked closer, a subtle slip occurred in the garden. A small hover drone, used for watering delicate plants, malfunctioned and began tipping toward a cluster of fragile blooms. Without thinking, Elias stepped forward and caught the drone before it could fall. The sudden movement startled Princess Aelith. She froze, her tablet nearly slipping from her hands. "You," she began, her voice sharp but tinged with surprise. "I'm sorry," Elias said quickly, holding the drone safely. "I didn't mean to startle you. I only wanted to prevent damage." Aelith studied him, her brows furrowing slightly. Then, to his relief, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "You help without being asked," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "Most do not notice or they assume it is not their concern." Elias smiled gently. "I notice, and I care. That is what I mean by respect. Not for protocol, not for reward, but simply because it is the right thing to do." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then the princess's lips curved into a faint smile, tentative but genuine. "You speak differently from others," she said. "Humans, you do not always follow the same rules we do. You seem straightforward, unafraid to act with reason rather than fear." Elias nodded. "We try, not perfectly, but honesty and clarity matter to us. Sometimes it is easier to speak plainly than to hide behind custom or caution." She looked at him, thoughtful, and then returned her attention to the plants. Yet now she did not move away, nor did she hide her curiosity. It was a small opening but significant. Elias realized that trust had begun to grow, built on observation, action, and the quiet recognition of shared values. Later, in a quiet hall near the observatory, an unexpected alarm rang. A malfunction in the palace's security system triggered the emergency protocols, sealing corridors and restricting movement. Courtiers and guards rushed to their stations, their expressions tense and alert. Princess Aelith was nearby, her eyes wide as she assessed the situation. Elias moved quickly to her side. "Princess, the system has malfunctioned. We need to follow the safety protocols. Are you familiar with them?" She nodded. "I am, but the central controls are inaccessible from here. If we do not act, some sections could be damaged." Together, they approached the nearest control console. Elias observed how she analyzed the system with precision, noting patterns, weaknesses, and sequences in the emergency protocols. He suggested minor adjustments, careful not to override her decisions, but offering insights from his human perspective. They worked silently, side by side, navigating a complex sequence of commands to stabilize the system. As the final adjustment clicked into place, the lights returned to normal, and the automated doors resumed their proper function. The room exhaled collectively, and courtiers began murmuring words of relief. Elias looked at Princess Aelith, expecting a formal nod or polite acknowledgement. Instead, she allowed a faint smile to appear, one that conveyed trust, respect, and a recognition of his genuine assistance. "You are capable," she said softly, not as a statement of surprise but as an acknowledgement. "You do not intervene without thought, yet you act when needed. That is rare." Elias felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not praise he sought, but the subtle connection that had begun to form. "I do not wish to overstep, Princess. I only wish to help when I can and to learn from you always." For the first time, she did not retreat from him. Instead, she gestured toward the observatory, where charts and telescopes lined the walls. "Then perhaps you may observe something more personal," she said. "I am studying a region of space rarely mapped by others. It is intricate." Elias followed, careful to maintain respectful distance. Inside the observatory, holographic projections of star systems spun slowly, casting a soft glow across the room. The princess pointed to a cluster of points, her fingers tracing lines that connected stars and planets in patterns of her own design. These stars, she explained, have been observed but not fully mapped. I believe there may be planets capable of sustaining life, hidden within this system. If discovered, they could expand understanding beyond our current knowledge. Elias watched, impressed. This is remarkable. You are not merely studying for curiosity. You are seeking knowledge that could benefit many worlds. That is, human and alien alike. Alith glanced at him, her eyes reflecting both surprise and amusement. You do not dismiss my work. Most humans would assume it is unimportant, or that a princess should focus on court matters alone. I do not assume, he said honestly. I value knowledge, effort, and insight. Titles and species matter little in the face of discovery and understanding. The princess studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Perhaps that is why you have not offended my mother or me. Perhaps that is why you are different. Elias felt the weight of her words. He had not only succeeded in earning a measure of trust, but he had also begun to break through the layers of expectation and caution that had defined her life. For the first time, he saw her as more than a princess constrained by duty. He saw her as a mind full of potential, curiosity, and intelligence. The following days brought more opportunities for subtle interaction. Elias observed the princess in council meetings, noting how she listened carefully, posed questions quietly, and challenged assumptions without arrogance. He saw her struggle with the expectations imposed by the queen and the court, recognizing the strength required to maintain composure in such an environment. During a garden walk one evening, Elias finally spoke openly about his observations. Princess, I see the burden you carry. Every movement, every word, every glance is watched. You are expected to meet standards that seem impossible, yet you manage them with grace. That is not unnoticed. Alith's eyes softened slightly. Most would speak politely, but the truth is rare. You see more than the surface. That is comforting. Elias nodded. Truth matters. It is the foundation of trust, understanding, and respect. Without it, even the most careful intentions can fail. That is why I speak plainly, even when it may be risky. The princess considered this, then allowed a small smile to form. Perhaps humans are more than I imagined. Perhaps your kind can teach even those of us bound by tradition to see differently. It was a quiet victory, subtle but profound. Elias realized that the connection he had begun to forge with Princess Alith was not based on grand gestures or formal protocols, but on honesty, patience, and a willingness to act thoughtfully. In a court defined by appearance and expectation, truth and empathy were powerful tools. One evening, a minor fire broke out in the palace kitchens due to an energy surge. Guards rushed to contain it, but Princess Alith calmly approached the situation, guiding staff and helping stabilize the energy flow. Elias followed, offering assistance without taking control, supporting her decisions while providing practical insights from his human experience. Together, they managed the emergency efficiently, demonstrating both cooperation and mutual respect. Afterward, in the quiet of the garden, the princess spoke quietly. You do not fear responsibility. You act when needed, but you do not impose yourself. That is unusual. Elias smiled gently. I act because it is the right thing to do, not for recognition or reward. I hope to learn from you as much as you may learn from me. Alith's gaze met his, and for the first time she allowed herself to be completely open. Perhaps this is how trust is built. Not through ceremony or power or position, but through shared understanding and action. Perhaps I can trust you. Elias felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It was a small step, but an essential one. Trust had begun to bloom, fragile yet undeniable, bridging the gap between human and Calitharian, outsider and princess. As night fell over the palace, the two walked in silence through the glowing gardens. The stars above reflected the patterns in the observatory, a reminder of the vast universe beyond the palace walls. Elias realized that this was only the beginning, a journey not just of diplomacy or negotiation, but of mutual understanding, empathy, and respect. And in that moment, under the soft luminescence of Calathar's gardens and the twin moons rising in the sky, Captain Elias Vorn understood that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons or power, but in honesty, courage, and the ability to see the truth in others, even when it was difficult, even when it challenged tradition, and even when it required patience beyond measure. The palace was quieter than usual that morning. Captain Elias Vorn awoke with a sense of anticipation. He had spent days observing, learning, and carefully interacting with Princess Aelith. Their trust was slowly growing, yet he knew that the most delicate part of their journey had only just begun. The palace was a web of observation, tradition, and expectation, and any misstep could undo the progress he had achieved. He walked through the corridors, noting the subtle signs of palace life, the quiet conversations behind closed doors, the swift movements of attendants, and the lingering looks exchanged between staff members. Everyone seemed aware of him, aware of the unusual dynamic developing between a human and the princess. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few openly disapproving. Elias understood that suspicion was natural. He had to act with patience and consistency. The princess appeared in the garden at the same hour, as if on a schedule known only to her. She moved among the bioluminescent plants, examining their growth and taking notes with precise attention. Her presence was calm, almost meditative, and Elias felt the growing warmth of familiarity. This time he approached without hesitation, mindful of her space yet willing to share his presence. "Good morning, Princess," he said softly. "The gardens look beautiful today." Aelith glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "Good morning, Captain. They do. The light is different today, and it highlights the flowers in a way I haven't noticed before." Elias nodded. "The light can change perspective. Sometimes seeing the same thing differently can reveal details we miss." She considered this, then returned to her work, though now she did not ignore him. He watched her for a while, noting the small signs of trust, the slight tilt of her head, the relaxed stance, and the occasional glance toward him. Their quiet routine was interrupted by an urgent call from the palace. A diplomatic delegation from a nearby planet had arrived unexpectedly. The Queen summoned Elias and instructed him to observe the interactions carefully, as misunderstandings could have serious consequences. Elias agreed, knowing that this was an opportunity to demonstrate human diplomacy in action. In the council chamber, Elias observed the delegation. They were a proud and confident species, accustomed to strict hierarchies and ceremonial exchanges. Misreading a gesture or speaking without precision could offend them, and the room was thick with tension. Princess Aelith was present as well, observing the proceedings. Her eyes were sharp, her attention focused, and Elias noted how she subtly interpreted the body language, tone, and expressions of the delegates. During the meeting, a minor miscommunication occurred. One delegate assumed the princess was being ignored and expressed displeasure through subtle but pointed gestures. Elias noticed immediately. He stepped forward calmly, explaining the misunderstanding in a straightforward manner, using careful words to clarify that Princess Aelith's silence was due to protocol, not disrespect. The delegate studied him, then nodded, accepting the explanation. The princess glanced at him with surprise and appreciation, her eyes conveying silent acknowledgement. For Elias, it was another small victory, a demonstration of human ability to navigate complex social situations with honesty, observation, and respect. After the meeting, the princess approached him. "You handled that well," she said softly. "Most would have fumbled or angered them further." Elias shook his head gently. "I only spoke the truth and observed carefully. Misunderstandings often arise from assumptions. They can be resolved with patience and honesty." Alith considered this, then allowed a small smile. "Perhaps there is more to humans than I imagined. Perhaps your kind is capable of clarity when others fail." Elias felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Trust was growing steadily. The princess was beginning to see him not as an outsider, but as someone who respected her world, understood her challenges, and valued truth above appearances. Later that afternoon, the palace experienced an unusual event. A minor energy surge caused lights to flicker and automated systems to malfunction. Staff rushed to stabilize the situation, but it quickly became clear that the surge was affecting critical areas. Princess Alith moved swiftly, assessing the problem and directing staff with calm authority. Elias joined her, offering assistance without taking control. He suggested practical adjustments based on human engineering principles, careful to support her decisions rather than override them. Together, they worked efficiently, stabilizing the systems and preventing potential damage. When the crisis was resolved, the princess allowed herself a moment of relaxation. "You do not intervene unnecessarily," she said quietly. "You act when needed, but you respect boundaries. That is unusual and admirable." Elias smiled gently. "I act because it is necessary and right, not for recognition. Respect must guide action or it becomes interference." Alith studied him, her expression thoughtful. "Most adults in this palace, even my mother's advisors, fail to see that. They act out of duty or fear, not understanding. You are different." Their conversations became more frequent, though always measured. Elias observed her in private study sessions, listened to her reflections on star systems, and discussed ideas about diplomacy, science, and ethics. Each interaction reinforced their growing trust. He never forced conversation, never demanded attention. He simply shared knowledge, offered insight, and acted with integrity. One evening, the Queen summoned him once more. "Captain Vorn," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "you have begun to earn the princess's attention. That is unexpected. Tell me why you act as you do, differently from other humans and all who have approached her before." Elias took a deep breath. "Your Majesty, I do not act differently to impress or gain favor. I act this way because I seek understanding, honesty, and respect. I wish to see your daughter as she truly is, not as protocol or expectation demands. That is the truth." The Queen studied him silently, her gaze penetrating. "Truth is rare in our court. Words are often measured, but actions carry hidden meaning. If your truth endures, it will be tested. Be prepared." Elias nodded. "I understand, Your Majesty. I am ready to act with integrity, even when it is difficult." The Queen's lips curved slightly, though her eyes remained sharp. "We shall see. For now, continue observing, continue learning. There will come a time when observation must turn to action. Your human way may yet surprise us." As he left the Queen's presence, Elias felt the weight of responsibility more strongly than ever. The palace was not merely a backdrop for diplomacy. It was a living network of observation, expectation, and tradition. Every action had consequence, and every choice had potential impact. He realized that the princess's world was far more complex than he had initially imagined. To earn trust, he would need more than honesty. He would need empathy, courage, and patience. Over the following days, Elias continued his careful approach. He observed the princess during council sessions, studied the patterns of her interactions, and noted the subtleties of Calitharian behavior. He saw how even minor gestures could be interpreted in multiple ways, and how trust could be lost as easily as it was gained. Yet despite these challenges, their connection deepened. One afternoon, while exploring a remote section of the palace, Elias found the princess alone in a quiet atrium filled with holographic star maps. She was tracing intricate patterns of constellations, her attention absorbed in calculations and projections. "You study the stars," Elias said softly. She glanced up, not startled but acknowledging him. "Yes, there is much to learn beyond the palace walls. The stars remind me that the universe is vast and that my choices, though constrained, are not the only possibilities." Elias nodded. Understanding comes from exploration, observation, and reflection. It is not limited to what is near or expected. The same applies to people. You cannot understand them by only following rules or tradition. Aelith considered this, her eyes thoughtful. "You speak truthfully and without fear. That is rare here. Most hide behind protocol or choose words to please others rather than convey meaning." "I believe honesty and respect are stronger than any protocol," Elias replied. "Even when it is difficult, even when it challenges expectation, speaking truth fosters understanding." The princess studied him silently, then allowed herself a faint smile. "Perhaps humans are more capable than I imagined. Perhaps your kind can teach even those of us bound by tradition to see differently." It was a quiet but profound moment. Trust was no longer fragile. It was beginning to grow, nurtured by honesty, patience, and shared experience. Elias realized that the princess was not simply learning from him. He was learning from her as well. The courage to act thoughtfully, the intelligence to navigate complex systems, and the resilience to face expectation all reflected qualities that humanity could admire and emulate. That evening, Elias returned to his quarters, reflecting on the day's events. The palace was alive with subtle interactions, each one a lesson in patience, observation, and empathy. He understood now that trust was built not in grand gestures, but in consistent honesty, careful observation, and shared experience. Princess Aelith had begun to see him as more than an outsider. She recognized his integrity, his respect for boundaries, and his willingness to act with reason and courage. And in turn, Elias saw her not merely as a princess bound by expectation, but as a mind capable of innovation, insight, and leadership. As night fell over Calithar, the twin moons casting silver light over the palace gardens, Elias felt a quiet determination. The journey was far from complete. Challenges awaited, misunderstandings could still arise, and the Queen's scrutiny was ever present. Yet for the first time, he sensed that truth, patience, and respect could bridge the gap between human and Calitharian, outsider and princess, observation and connection. And so, under the soft glow of the palace gardens and the rising moons, Captain Elias Vorn prepared for the days ahead. He understood that humanity's strength lay not in power or weapons, but in honesty, empathy, courage, and the willingness to see others as they truly are. In the quiet of Calithar, a bond was forming, subtle, fragile, yet full of promise, and the story of trust, understanding, and mutual respect was only beginning. The palace was restless that morning. Word had spread of Captain Elias Vorn's unusual presence near Princess Aelith, and whispers moved through the corridors like a current, touching every level of courtly life. Some saw him as an anomaly, others as a potential threat, and a few, quietly, admired his honesty and integrity. Elias was aware of the scrutiny, but his focus remained steadfast. Today, he would act not just to observe, but to solidify the trust he had been carefully building. Princess Aelith had already begun her morning routines in the palace observatory. Her notebook lay open, filled with sketches, calculations, and star maps, but her eyes were drawn repeatedly to the palace gardens beyond the window. The gardens were alive with movement as attendants and staff began their day, yet the princess seemed distant, thoughtful, as though anticipating an event she could not yet name. Elias approached quietly, mindful of her space and her focus. "Good morning, princess," he said softly. Aelith looked up, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of early sunlight. "Good morning, Captain," she replied. "There is much to consider today. The court is uneasy and there are matters that cannot be ignored." Elias nodded. "I understand. Whatever unfolds, I am here to support, to act thoughtfully, and to observe where needed. You will not face it alone." She regarded him for a long moment, the hint of a smile forming. "You speak plainly without fear. That is rare here. Perhaps your kind truly values honesty." Elias allowed himself a small smile. "It is the foundation of trust. Without it, action can be misinterpreted and intentions distorted. That is why I speak plainly, even when it may challenge expectation." Their conversation was interrupted by a summons from Queen Lyrana herself. Elias followed, careful to maintain a calm demeanor, knowing that the queen's gaze was sharp and discerning. The great hall was filled with advisors, diplomats, and attendants, all standing in formal anticipation. The queen sat upon her elevated throne, her posture regal, her eyes fixed upon him as if weighing his soul. "Captain Vorn," she began, her voice echoing with authority, "the time has come to see whether your understanding of my daughter and her world is genuine, and whether your human way can withstand the pressures of our court. Today, a test will occur. The princess will face a challenge that requires both courage and insight. You must choose: act, observe, or interfere. Your decision will speak as loudly as any words." Elias met her gaze steadily. "Your Majesty, I will act with integrity and respect, and I will seek truth above all. That is my choice." The queen inclined her head slightly, a gesture of approval, then turned her attention to the princess. "Aelith, your trial is not against an enemy of your people, but against circumstance, expectation, and fear. Will you rise to meet it?" Aelith nodded, her eyes determined yet calm. "I will." The first test unfolded in the central gardens. A sudden energy surge from a nearby experimental device caused instability in the environment systems, threatening the delicate balance of flora, fountains, and bioluminescent plants. Staff reacted with alarm, but Aelith moved with precision, directing personnel, stabilizing systems, and evaluating the consequences of each adjustment. She was a whirlwind of controlled action, her mind working faster than anyone could observe. Elias followed, not to overshadow, but to provide guidance and assistance when requested. He suggested minor adjustments to energy flow, helped stabilize the systems with human engineering techniques, and acted as a steady presence in the midst of chaos. The princess noticed his calm efficiency, the way he moved without disturbing her authority, and allowed his contributions quietly. A particularly unstable section of the garden required immediate attention. A small structural failure threatened to damage a rare cluster of flowering plants. Elias moved swiftly, lifting the debris and stabilizing the supports, while Aelith directed staff to adjust the energy regulators. Together, they prevented potential catastrophe. When the situation was fully stabilized, the gardens were silent, except for the quiet hum of restored systems. Courtiers and staff looked on with awe, and the queen observed from her vantage point, her expression unreadable but attentive. The princess turned to Elias, her eyes reflecting gratitude and respect. "You act without seeking recognition, yet your presence strengthens my efforts. That is remarkable." Elias shook his head gently. "I act because it is necessary. I do not seek praise, only to help and understand. Your courage and intelligence guided our actions. Without your leadership, nothing could have been achieved." Aelith studied him in thoughtful silence. Perhaps this is the human way. Observe, act when needed, and seek truth. It is powerful and unlike anything I have seen here." Word of their success spread quickly throughout the palace. Rumors shifted from skepticism to admiration, as staff and advisors began to recognize the value of his honesty, patience, and careful action. The queen summoned Elias once more, this time with a different tone, less judgmental, more measured, yet still authoritative. Captain Vorn, she said, you have demonstrated understanding, courage, and respect. You have acted in alignment with truth, supported my daughter without overshadowing her, and maintained integrity under scrutiny. These qualities are rare among humans, yet you have embodied them fully. Tell me, what drives you to act as you do? Elias met her gaze calmly. Your Majesty, humanity values truth, empathy, and courage. We are not perfect and we often falter, but we strive to act rightly, even when it is difficult. My actions are guided by honesty and respect, not by fear or expectation. That is all. The queen remained silent for a moment, then inclined her head. Very well. You have proven yourself, not only as a visitor but as someone capable of understanding my daughter and her world. You have earned her trust and by extension my respect. Aelith approached, her expression softened. Captain Vorn, she said, her voice quiet but firm, you have shown that humans can act with integrity, insight, and courage. You see truth where others see only expectation. For that I trust you and I wish to continue learning from you, not as a duty but as a choice. Elias felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was not victory over enemies, nor recognition from the court, but the quiet acknowledgement of trust, mutual respect, and shared understanding. The bond they had carefully cultivated had withstood scrutiny, pressure, and expectation. Over the next several days, life in the palace settled into a new rhythm. Elias continued to observe and assist, but now with the quiet recognition of the queen and the trust of the princess. They worked together on minor experiments, analyzed star systems, and discussed diplomacy with neighboring planets. Their collaboration was marked not by authority or hierarchy, but by mutual respect, honesty, and thoughtful action. During one quiet evening in the observatory, Elias and Aelith examined a cluster of distant stars. The room was filled with soft light from holographic maps and telescopes projecting constellations onto the walls. These stars, Aelith said softly, tracing lines between points, are difficult to map, but they hold possibilities. Life could exist there, hidden from ordinary observation. Elias nodded. Exploration is often like that, hidden truths waiting to be discovered. Patience, careful observation, and courage reveal what others overlook. She looked at him, a faint smile forming. You have shown me that human ways, honest, thoughtful, courageous, can achieve understanding where tradition alone may fail. Perhaps your kind truly has something to teach us. Elias felt a sense of quiet pride. He had not come to conquer, to command, or to impress. He had come to act with integrity, to observe, to assist, and to understand. In doing so, he had forged a connection that transcended culture, species, and expectation. Humanity's strength had shown, not through power, but through truth, patience, and empathy. The Queen summoned a formal audience to acknowledge the successful resolution of recent challenges. Courtiers, diplomats, and attendants filled the grand hall, yet there was a subtle shift in the air. Where suspicion had once thrived, admiration and cautious respect now lingered. Queen Lyrana spoke first, her voice clear and commanding. Today, we recognize the contributions of Captain Elias Vorn. Through honesty, courage, and careful observation, he has demonstrated the values of humanity in a manner that benefits both my daughter and this court. Let it be known that his presence here is not merely tolerated, but respected. Aelith stepped forward, her gaze meeting Elias. Captain Vorn, she said, her voice steady and warm, you have proven that actions guided by truth and empathy can build trust, even in the most challenging circumstances. You have earned my confidence, and I am grateful for your presence and guidance. Elias bowed respectfully. Princess, your Majesty, it has been an honor. I have learned as much from your wisdom, courage, and insight as I hope you have learned from me. Trust is earned, and I will continue to act with integrity to maintain it. The hall erupted in quiet applause, acknowledging not just his actions, but the bridge he had built between humanity and Calithar. For Elias, it was a moment of triumph unlike any he had experienced in his career, not through conquest, but through patience, understanding, and truth. In the days that followed, the relationship between Elias and Princess Aelith grew naturally. They collaborated on scientific studies, explored distant star systems through the observatory, and worked to improve palace systems and diplomatic channels. The court, initially skeptical, began to see the value of integrity, honesty, and thoughtful action, inspired by the human example Elias had provided. One evening, as the twin moons of Calathar rose over the palace gardens, Aelith spoke quietly to Elias. "You have shown me that humanity is capable of courage, truth, and respect. For that I am grateful. Perhaps our worlds are not so different after all. Trust, honesty, and understanding are universal strengths." Elias nodded, gazing at the moons reflecting on the shimmering water of the fountains. "You have taught me as well, Princess. Courage, patience, and insight are qualities we all share, no matter the planet or species. Humanity is strong not in power alone, but in the willingness to act rightly, even when it is difficult." The palace was quiet, peaceful, and alive, with the subtle sense of accomplishment and mutual respect. The challenges of culture, expectation, and duty had been met with honesty, courage, and thoughtful action. Humanity's values, truth, empathy, and integrity, had bridged a divide, earning trust, respect, and admiration in a world far from home. As night settled over Calathar, Elias and Princess Aelith stood together in the gardens, watching the stars that had first drawn her curiosity. Their bond was subtle, yet undeniable, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the recognition that understanding was stronger than assumption, and truth stronger than fear. And in that quiet moment, under the twin moons and the distant constellations, it was clear that humanity's greatest strength had been revealed, not through conquest, power, or dominance, but through honesty, courage, and the simple, enduring act of seeing others as they truly are. The palace had changed. The princess had grown in confidence, understanding, and trust. And Captain Elias Vorn had shown, with quiet determination and integrity, that the human way, thoughtful, honest, and courageous, was a force capable of bridging worlds and creating bonds that would endure across the stars.